Welcome. If you're just joining, welcome. We're just giving it a little minute here for people to log in. We're working on getting the chat active so that you can share the information. It looks like Katie's in there. Okay, Butterfly got in. Yay. Thank you for that. You did. We're good. So I think we'll get rolling. Hi, Diane. Thanks for joining. And as you come in, now that we have the chat active, you are welcome to give us your name, where you're joining us from, and if you're so inclined, what you're excited about learning today. And we will continue on with our introduction. Welcome to our webinar called The Plastic Crisis, Science and Solutions. We're going to get rolling in just a moment. My name is Kathy King. I'm the Director of Climate Education and Leadership at the Community Environmental Council, and I'm your host for tonight's webinar called The Plastic Crisis, Science and Solutions. The Community Environmental Council, or CEC, as many of you know us, is focused on reversing climate change, repairing the damage, and protecting local communities from extreme weather effects. We do this by advancing rapid and equitable solutions to the climate crisis. For example, our plastic reduction program, which we're talking about tonight and which I have led for CEC since 2009, has helped pass regional laws that reduce distribution of single-use plastics. We've installed more than 125 water stations in schools and public spaces, and we've provided a lot of education at schools and events like this one on how to ditch plastic in our everyday lives. We are very grateful to have Alejandra Warren and Dr. Matt Warren of Plastic Free Future here with us tonight to share the science behind the plastic crisis and actions we can take to reduce our plastic use. This webinar is taking place in the unceded territory of California, home to nearly 200 tribal nations. We acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of our many regions, including the Chumash, the original inhabitants of the Santa Barbara region, where CEC's environmental hub is located and where I am coming to you from tonight. We also acknowledge the impact that colonization has on Indigenous peoples and the environment. The extractive economics of colonialism have led to the disruption of natural systems and the changing climate we are now experiencing. If you feel inclined, please add your acknowledgement to the chat. Thank you for taking time to listen, learn, and steward the land. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the CEC website in the next couple of weeks. Everyone who registered will receive a link to the recording and other resources in a follow-up email. Feel free to share with your friends to help spread the word on how to live with less plastic and why it is so important. Here's our agenda for tonight. We're going to begin with Dr. Matt Warren of Plastic Free Future, who will share the science behind the plastic crisis and how that is directly tied to climate change. Then Alejandra Warren of Plastic Free Future will follow with areas of hope and progress toward creating a more circular economy. Then I will finish with some exciting things happening in our communities around plastic reduction and ways you can take action. After the presentation, we'll open it up to Q&A, where you will have the chance to share your questions with our speakers. And we will, so you don't have to sit on your hands the whole evening, we will take a question or two in between each of these presentations, so watch for that as well. And we encourage you to all share questions in the Q&A, and you're also welcome to share your comments, questions, appreciations, or other resources in the chat as well throughout the webinar. And we will work to address questions either real time typing them to you or live during Q&A. I hope that all made sense. So let's get it going. I'm pleased now to turn it over to Dr. Matt Warren from Plastic Free Future to begin with the science behind the plastic crisis.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Matt Warren. I'm a co-founder and science advisor for Plastic Free Future, and I'm a tropical forest ecologist. And I study how carbon and nitrogen and other nutrients recycle and flow through tropical ecosystems. And I became really interested in the plastic issue, the plastic crisis, when I learned just about how much plastic is being produced and released into our environment each year. with no real natural systems evolved to break that plastic down and to decompose it like regular, organic matter. So over millions of years, our natural systems have evolved to break down all kinds of organic material, but plastic is new. And so the natural decomposition system hasn't evolved quickly enough to keep up with how much plastic we're putting out there. And it's impacting everything from our land, it's in our oceans, our freshwater, our atmosphere, and it's impacting the climate, our human health, the health of our ecosystems. And also all of these impacts are disproportionately impacting people, uh, uh, lower income communities and communities of color and indigenous communities. So here's a quick look at the lifespan of plastics. Everything from extraction, most plastics are made from fossil fuel. Essentially all plastics are made from fossil fuel. And so from extraction to the production of plastics, to the distribution, consumption, and ultimate disposal of plastics, all of those are causing incredible amounts of pollution, and all are disproportionately impacting communities of color and indigenous communities. And especially in the disposal, in the disposal stage, a lot of our plastics waste is being exported. So it's an issue of waste colonialism as we export plastic waste to other countries. So for example, in California, we ship a very high proportion of our waste to Mexico. I think it's close to about 80% of our so-called recycled plastic waste is actually shipped to Mexico. And once it goes there, there's no accountability to see if it's actually recycled. So we're actually sending our plastic waste out to pollute less advantaged communities or lower income communities. Next, please. So how much plastic are we producing? Here's the graph. It's interesting. We can see about 56% of all plastics have been produced since the year 2000. And we're currently producing about 430 metric tons per year. That's about 9.5 billion pounds of plastic produced per year. So I encourage you to look at this graph and find where the decade where you consider like your childhood or when you grew up, and look at how much plastic was being produced during that decade. For example, the 80s or the 90s or the 70s or maybe the 50s and 60s. And then look at where it's going. It's going to projected to triple by 2050 and double by 2030. It's almost an exponential increase. And so our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids are going to be living in a world with a lot more plastic than we're living in today. Next. So what kind of, we're producing all this plastic, eventually it all becomes waste. So what are we look at like the different categories of waste. So the biggest categories are these short-lived plastics. Those are like single-use plastics, like food packaging or any kind of product packaging. Plastics that are designed to be used for, in general, less than 4 years, but most of these single-use plastics can be used just for a few minutes, or maybe not even used at all before they become waste. So if we look at short-lived plastics, single-use plastics, and textiles, that's 78%. So we're always hearing from industry, what about our glasses frames? What about our iPhones? What about all of these wonderful things we have made from plastics that we need? And the fact is, we don't need to eliminate those things from our lives right now to have an impact. We can just focus on single-use packaging and textiles, and we're already getting at 78% of the problem. So what happens to the plastic waste? You can see on the right-hand side, basically very little of it is actually recycled and going back into the waste stream. It's only about maybe 5% of plastics are actually recycled in the United States. So we have an incredible amount of plastic going into our environment, and even more plastic going into our environment than actually into our landfills. Next, please. This is all contributing to climate change. If plastics were a country, they would be the 5th largest emitter of carbon pollution to the atmosphere. So that's equivalent to about 189 coal-fired power plants. So even though we're phasing out fossil fuels and coal, as we increase plastic production, it's taking the place of fossil fuels in terms of carbon emissions to the atmosphere. So it's projected that by 2050, 15% of all fossil fuel emissions will be just from plastic production. So it's impacting our environment in a very big way. Next, please. So once that plastic gets out into our environment, we're concerned about it. It, as I mentioned, never breaks down. It just breaks down into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, down to microplastics, down to nanoplastics, and then eventually down to a molecular level. So it never truly goes away. That's why you've maybe heard of, like, that's why they call them forever chemicals, or because they're so persistent in the environment. And the concern is that they bioaccumulate through the food web. So that means that smaller organisms ingest these microplastics and nanoplastics, larger organisms consume the smaller organisms, and they concentrate as you go up the food web to the top predators. They're concentrating these toxins and these plastics more and more into their bodies, and they're getting into us too. So we're ingesting a lot of plastic. So it's in our food. A lot of the plastic that's going into our bodies are through the consumption of food and bottled water, things like that, food and beverages. We're also breathing it. So if you think of, or if you've seen, like, kind of when sunlight comes through the window and you can kind of see the dust floating around in the air, a lot of that is microfibers that's shed off of our clothes, off of our carpets. A lot of the textiles now have some plastic component to them. So all of that shedding, and even when you think about dryer vents and lint, all of that's going into the atmosphere and we're breathing it. It's also in personal care products, so we're rubbing it on our skin, and it can actually get into our bodies through our skin. And then to a lesser extent, the biomedical treatments. So we have, if you're getting some kind of replacement that has a plastic component, that's another potential pathway where plastics can get into your body. So yeah, it's just through contact, through breathing it, and through eating and drinking it. That's mainly how plastics are getting into our body. Next, please. So how much are we consuming? I'm sure you've seen the estimate of 5 grams per week, which is like a credit card per week of plastics that we're consuming. And there's been a study since then that has produced these great maps that show the maybe a little bit more accurate amount of how much plastic people are consuming around the world. So the 5 grams per week is really on the very high end. So it's likely in Asia and places like Indonesia and Malaysia and China. They're consuming much more plastic than in other parts of the world. So you can see in the top graphic, that's the daily intake. So through consumption, so you can see Southeast Asia, Indonesia, China is much higher than other parts in the world, and that's mainly because they subsist on a fish-based diet. So they're eating a lot more fish, and there's a lot of microplastics in that fish, so they're consuming more microplastics than in other parts of the world. And the bottom figure is how much is inhaled. So you can see that in China, for example, they're inhaling much more plastic than in Canada or the United States. So it's, a credit card a week is kind of the catchy estimate, but there's a lot of nuance to it. There's a lot of variability around the world of how much plastic people are actually consuming. Next, please. So when we founded Plastic Free Future, it was the interesting thing was there wasn't a whole lot of research out there yet, but we're seeing over the course of the past few years just more and more and more research about how plastics are getting into our bodies and what they're doing to us, and the prevalence of plastic throughout the different systems in our bodies. So you might have heard of BPA, for example. That's a chemical that's found in plastic that has been directly linked to all of these different negative health outcomes. And it's one of the few chemicals that has where that direct link has been established, and that's why it's one of the few that's actually regulated. So that's why you would see things that would say BPA free, because it's actually been shown to have negative impacts. However, there's about 16,000 chemicals like BPA that go into plastics, and very few of those have been actually studied. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there's 16,000 known plastic chemicals, but only very few of those have been actually studied. And only 6% of those are like BPA and regulated internationally. They're produced in incredibly high volumes, 9 billion tons per year of these chemicals. And at least 6,300 have high exposure potential. That means there's about 6,300 chemicals that are very common in plastics that we're exposing ourselves to. And of those, 1,500 are actually known to be leached from plastic. So like drinking water from the water bottles or microwaving things in plastic. Anytime you're putting hot liquid into something plastic, those chemicals are being released. Plastic tea bags, for example, are releasing these chemicals into the tea you're drinking. So it's quite concerning because a lot of these chemicals are released from plastics, and then we're consuming them. So of those, about 4,200 are chemicals of concern, meaning that they're persistent in the environment, they're bioaccumulating, so they're accumulating up the food chain. They're mobile, so they move around a lot, and they're also toxic, they're harmful. So a lot of these chemicals have been shown to impact all of these negative health outcomes like thyroid disorders, diabetes, obesity, and interestingly, infertility. So they're impacting our reproductive systems of men and women. And so, plastics have been found in the testes, the semen, the penises of males that have been studied. Pretty much every single sample has had plastics, and also female reproductive systems as well. So it's very likely that all of these chemicals and plastics are contributing to a very well documented global decline in fertility. And plastics are also found in placenta. So our babies are being born already exposed to plastic. They're exposed to plastic before they're even born into this world. So it's quite concerning, and that's what we're really trying to raise awareness about. Next slide, please.
My turn.
Oh, so I'll pass it over to Alejandra. Thanks. I think they're gonna give a question.
Do we have a question for Dr. Madam Warren?
We do, if we want to take a second. Thank you for asking. There's one question from M. Pizel. The definition of single use as less than 4 years, is that a legal definition, or how did you come about that information of the 4-year mark?
That's mainly the working definition of these sort of international policy groups that are working on the issue. So I'm not really sure. They don't really use single use. They use short-lived. So the term would just be a short-lived plastic. Would be a plastic that is designed to be used for a maximum of 4 years and then disposed of. But of those short-lived plastics, it's the vast majority are what we would consider single-use plastic. So a food wrapper or a plastic straw, something like that.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the great question. And there's more questions coming in, which we will get to following the presentations when we get to the Q&A segment. Because now we're going to turn to our next speaker. It is my great pleasure to introduce Alejandra Warren. I have been such a big fan of her work for what feels like many years. And you may remember that the theme of this year's Earth Day nationwide was Planet vs. Plastics. So it was the perfect opportunity to honor Plastic Free Future at our event in Santa Barbara this year. So we were thrilled when they were able to come, and Alejandra gave a speech on the main stage at Earth Day. And she's such an inspiring speaker. And I'm so pleased that I got to meet her in person, and you will see that she's every bit as wonderful on Zoom as she is in person. So I will now turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
That's so generous, Kathy. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us. And the fact that you're here, it already says that we have hope for the future. I know it is overwhelming, and I know it's really sad to see the numbers, to see the data, to see all of this information that we have coming. But I'm here to give you a little bit of hope, and I'm here to tell you that all the little things that you're doing at home right now and all the little things that you're going to be adding to your routine after this presentation are going to have a really big effect, more than you think. And I know there's a lot of conversation out there like, well, but we need policy and we need industry to take responsibility. That's 100% true. That is true. But that doesn't mean that we can do the small changes that are going to have an impact. So I really invite you to take a second and to look around. And like Dr. Matt Warren said, plastic is everywhere. The computer I'm talking to right now has plastic. The desk here has plastic. We're touching plastic every single moment. So let's start looking at plastic, because we have this blindness and we're not seeing it. So just the fact that we're seeing the plastic around us, that's a good beginning. So all the little things that you're doing do have an impact. In this picture that we have right here, look at the picture. That's a picture of our pantry at home. And I wanted to show you that because that was not like that 10 years ago. That was not like that 15 years ago. It took us a long time to get to this point. It took us a lot of effort and a lot of work. And as you can see, we don't have these beautiful Instagram jars that everyone shows. That's the jar from the pasta sauce. That's the jar from the olives. That's the jar from, because that's part of the point, that we don't have to think of sustainability as something that you have to buy. It's more about creativity and resourcefulness. So what do we need to make changes? We need to start seeing plastic. And when you are craving those delicious fruits and you go to Whole Foods and you see that section and you see they look so beautiful and shiny and bright, just see the plastic behind that. You are going to consume that fruit probably in 5 minutes, and that plastic is going to live forever. It's going to go to landfill, or if you are smart enough to give it a little rinse and recycle it, it's probably going to end up in another country, because only 5% of that plastic is truly recycled in the United States. So we need to start seeing that plastic so we can make better choices. And when we support farmers markets, we are going to find more options that have less plastic, but also have a social impact, because we're supporting our farmers too. Supermarkets, we realize that the less we buy in real supermarkets like Safeway or supermarkets like that, the less plastic you're going to bring to your home. And I love the picture on the right, because that's a zero waste store that we're starting to see little by little more of them. And when you think about the nutritional value of the food that we're buying from a zero waste store, we're getting all of the nutrition we actually need compared to the fully packaged stuff that we're getting at the supermarket. So it's not only better for the planet, it's also better for us. This is a picture of my cat. She's not happy because I didn't buy any tuna, but we wanted to show you when we support our markets, our farmers markets, and we support our farmers, we can come home without any plastic. Again, it's not something that is available from everyone. So when we start thinking about less plastic, we also have to think about food justice. There are communities that don't have access to these beautiful products that I have here. And we do partner with organizations that are working to bring healthy, clean, food without packaging to these communities. The one on the left is the reusable bags that we make and that we offer in the market. If you're into sewing, I encourage you to make some for gifts. And we give them to friends all the time as birthday gifts or holiday gifts, and they're a big success. And that's a way to tell people, look, you don't need that little plastic that we call the compostable from the supermarket. We don't need it. Next. So everywhere at home, we can make those little decisions. And I love this one because when you start seeing the plastic, you can start removing it. We already have options for shampoo, for soap, and even for toothbrushes. Next. So it says that a person on average will use 300 toothbrushes during their lifetime. And that was my entire childhood, using all of these ones. We go to the dentist and they still give us these toothbrushes. So we have to refuse them all the time. But if you think about it, all those 300 toothbrushes for every single American are still somewhere. So when you think about every single item, like these ones that we have here, those small choices that we have, those small choices that we make are really going to have an impact. And we have so many beautiful options now. Like in this picture, we can see, in the next picture, we can see how when we are also talking about reducing, can we go to the next slide, please? When we're talking about reducing plastic, we're also talking about using less chemicals in our body, because all of those shampoos and soaps and body washes that we buy, they're so full of chemicals. Look at the list of horrible things that we're putting in our bodies and the water. And they're not even cheaper. They make us think, oh, sustainable products are more expensive, but that's actually not right. And you're probably supporting a small business if you are buying more natural products. Next. So this is what we want to see. We want the future with less plastic. We're talking about these plastics that we're using for just hours, we're using for just days. If you have a conditioner, maybe a few weeks, but they're going to stay in the environment forever. So we want to see less plastic in supermarkets, and that only happens when we purchase the other option. It could be a little bit more, a few cents more expensive, $1 more expensive, but when we make that change, we're sending the message that this is what we want. That becomes more common, and that means that low-income communities at some point are going to have equal access to these materials with less plastic. Next. Fashion, like Dr. Matt Warren was saying, textiles are a huge problem. If you see what you're wearing right now, probably your Patagonia jacket is plastic. Probably your sweater is plastic. We moved away from all of these beautiful natural fibers that we used to have, and now this is how it looks like. So buying less is going to have the biggest impact, consuming less. Next. I love this picture from our farmers market. This is one of our programs. We have a swap table, and we started testing it a little bit to see how it went. We have people bringing a lot of stuff and people taking a lot of stuff. So when you're talking about the circular economy, don't let people fool you into thinking that is reusing plastic. We're talking about community. We're talking about love. We're talking about care. We're talking about keeping the resources in our communities. So look at that beautiful exchange of people bringing things that they don't want anymore. We always say, please make sure they're clean, make sure they don't have any stains, just to provide that dignity to our community, but it works. And on the right hand, look at that beautiful pattern to fix your shirt. So when we're thinking about fixing and repairing, that has more impact than buying sustainable. Next. And I see this as a mix of the past and the future. I call it the retro future. And I love that WandaVision image because it makes me think that's exactly what we think. That's exactly what we need. Looking back into what were the things that work. I remember my grandpa shaving with that razor, and at some point industry told us that's too dangerous or that's dirty, and they gave us this idea of it's better single use, and we have to go back to the way we did things before because we did it. We can do it again. Next. If we live without plastic before, we can live without plastic again. If you think about the time that humanity has existed, that's around 6,000 years that we have lived without plastic. We did it before. That means we already have the solutions. And I know we want to think about new and exciting and different, but it's not necessarily something that we have to invent. It's something that we have to revisit and we have to embrace again. Be careful with greenwashing. Industry knows that we're paying attention to this. They know that the younger generations are even more concerned about plastic. So they are doing all of these crazy things to convince us that they're doing better when they're not. And the list on the right is the list that we have identified as the most common greenwashing terms. So please keep an eye on those. This is an example that some of you might not love, but I think it's a really great example. Cliff Bar, that company claims that they're a zero waste company. And when you go do the research, it means that they're trying to make less plastic in the production. But actually, those Cliff Bar wrapping bars are the ones that we find the most. When we do those hikes that are really remote in Death Valley and other remote places in parks, Cliff Bar is what we find, because people see oh, they're zero waste, they're cleaner, so we want to buy them. And that messaging is really working, so people think they're actually making a difference when that wrap is contaminating our oceans and our lands as much as a Snickers bar. Next. Be really careful with all these schemes of TerraCycle and Ridwell. We all want those things to work. In our heart, we want to do the best thing, but they're just a distraction, a very dangerous distraction. Consuming less is actually the only solution. Next. So how are we going to get out of this problem? Reduce, reuse, refill, and repair. We need to move away from recycling. Recycling is not a real solution. I love these pictures from our programs. We have programs mostly focused in communities that are underserved, and we just provide them little options, little solutions. Community are embracing the changes, and we're seeing that it works. Next. Nothing fancy, just small things like bringing your own jar for your boba tea. You don't have to leave your boba tea. If you leave your boba tea, enjoy your boba tea, but make sure that you see that plastic of the boba tea and make sure that you're trying to make the changes. On the right, this is part of our program. We're giving plain products. If you don't know about plain products, I really encourage you to look at them. They're a company that provides refillable options for shampoo and soap. Next. So all those little things that we do, like bringing our cup, you say, oh, well, it's just one cup. But if you think about it, we use billions of coffee cups every year, and they're lined in plastic. So just bringing your cup has more impact than you really imagine. Next. We also bring these beautiful reusable stainless steel materials to events, mostly Latinx events, because we want to encourage reuse. And when we talk about reuse, we're not talking about reuse of plastics, like industry wants us to believe that that's the solution. Reuse your plastic and you're fine. Plastics are toxic, even if they are reusable. So even if when you get excited about a reusable program that has these plastic containers, think that that's plastic. So you're still eating chemicals and you're still harming communities of color with the production of plastic when you use reusable plastic. So moving to cleaner alternatives that we can use thousands of times is going to be the real difference. Next. And something that I feel like is really important, when we talk about plastic, we're not talking about intersectionality. Intersectionality means all of the connections that we have around plastic, the social injustices around plastic, the communities that don't have access to options with less plastic. So everything that you do in your life that has a social impact or a social aspect to it, all of that is going to contribute to the plastic crisis, because we're building community, we're moving away from the system, we're moving away from consumerism. So even when you're putting your backyard compost and working on your backyard compost, you're making a difference already. You're feeding that beautiful soil that is going to be rich of nutrients, that is probably going to grow more food. So all those little things that you're doing make a really big difference. So get out of the sustainability point and think about all of the things that you're impacting with that small action. It's more than the trash, it's more than the landfill, it's entire communities that are benefiting from your small efforts. I love this sentence that says, the greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. We need to save the planet, and that starts with the small things. Next. And you're not alone. If you're trying the little things, everywhere around the world, everyone's trying those small little things. We're going back to the systems that we had before. I love this picture from Zambia. That's how milk was delivered in my childhood. I'm from Colombia, I'm from South America. That's exactly how my milk was, in a big container. My grandma used to get the jar out and they would refill my grandma's glass jar, zero packaging. And now you can see in Thailand, supermarkets are trying too. So you're not alone. Everyone in the world is trying to do something better. Next. I love this picture of the babalas in India. These people are delivering lunches to hundreds and thousands of people in India in these reusable containers in these tiffins. So we're not alone in the quest. Everywhere in the world, we're trying to do better. And this has been happening for thousands of years, just like this picture of people reusing their little container. I took these pictures in Argentina and Uruguay in a trip that I made because I love the fact that people don't care. They're walking around the street with their container and with their thermos. And we have to normalize that reusability. We have to normalize that effort and celebrate it. Next. But I know we need policy too. So don't worry, there are people working hard. Hundreds of environmental organizations are working to pass policy federal and globally. Next. This is a picture of the Global Plastics Treaty that is going on right now. If you want more information, we can add more information. This is led by the United Nations, and there are hundreds of organizations working on putting together a global plastics treaty that is going to help us curb the problem of plastics. That's why we need to push the US to do better at this. More information we're going to share with you. All of this information in UNEP is going to be available to you after this webinar. Next. Also, we're going to be sharing a petition. We have thousands of signatures already. We would love for you to join to ask the United States to take a stronger stand on this treaty. And I want to end with this beautiful illustration that we created to remind you that the intersectionality that I was talking about, all the little things that we do have an impact, not only on our planet, because we have to be centered in the planet, but we're all part of the planet. Humans are part of the planet. So when we do those small things, we are benefiting others too. And that's why it's important to say that if you are an environmentalist, always be an intersectional environmentalist. Thank you.
Thank you. That's beautiful. We're sort of we'll stop and take a quick question with you, if you don't mind, Alejandra. There's kind of been a theme in some of the questions that have been coming through, which is, should I reuse my plastic items? Because, you know, everyone wants to be well-intentioned and make the most use of things that come into their lives. But is that something that you encourage for people to reuse items made out of plastic?
That's such a beautiful question because you are not thinking, let me get the Instagram style containers and ditch everything and switch to plastic. So that you're asking the right question. Thank you for that question. Yes, you can definitely reuse your plastic containers, but make sure that they are not for food. Anything that touches your food should never be touching plastic. So you can use it maybe to store the Legos for your kids, to store the little toys or pencils, something probably that the kids are not gonna even touch. But yes, we need to start thinking about phasing out plastics of our home. But yeah, we know that those plastics that we already have, let's try to find a use for them.
Great. What great advice. And thank you for all the great advice that you just gave us. And we'll come back to Alejandra and Matt during our Q&A, which will be just in a few minutes. And I'll close us out now to talk a little bit more about some solutions and some of CEC's work in this area. So as we've heard, there are just a huge number of impacts to producing so much plastic. So let's do just a quick overview of additional ways that plastic is a problem and how we can be part of the solution. I mean, as you heard, there are such intersectional issues with environmentalism in general and with plastic. And the social justice implications that come along with plastic are globally and in the US. So in Southeast Texas and Louisiana, fossil fuels are being extracted and plastic is being produced near where people live, work, and go to school. There's an 85-mile corridor along the Mississippi River in the Gulf South that you might have heard of, and it's called Cancer Alley. And that region has our country's highest concentration of petrochemical plants and refineries, the highest rate of air pollution caused cancer in the United States. It's nearly 50 times the national average. Local activists you may have heard of, like Sharon Levine in Louisiana, have successfully stopped new factories from being built. And we can support their efforts by connecting the dots between the materials we use every day and the long-term impacts to the people who live near where they are made. We can also push back on the companies we buy from to ask that they reduce plastic packaging. Lots of them have social media presence, so one way to make your voice heard is in the comments when they do posts. And as much as we all try our hardest to reduce and reduce and reuse first, because recycling comes last, we are going to have items to recycle. And so what we put in our blue bin does matter because items that are contaminated can ruin viable items. Recyclables should be empty, clean, dry, and unbagged. Bagging them makes it more likely that the paper will get wet, and the paper has a lot of value when it's dry, not when it's wet. Leaving your recyclables unbagged also saves money on trash bags, and those trash bags are not recyclable, so they're just going to get tossed at the recycling center. And please try to avoid wish cycling by putting items in the blue bin that are unlikely to get recycled. Recycling is hand sorted, and that process is slowed down when there's too much waste mixed in, so they might miss things that actually could have gotten recycled. Items that are often wish cycled include to-go coffee cups, which we already heard tonight. They're lined with plastic. They're not recyclable. Food service styrofoam, which is never recyclable. Bioplastics, they are very confusing. Plastic cutlery, and currently cartons. The only plastics that are currently recyclable in the Santa Barbara area are those numbered 1 and 2 that held liquid. So think about a detergent bottle, a soda bottle, something like that. No to-go containers, yogurt cups, or anything that held food. These acceptable items also need to be larger than 6 inches. So please don't sweat the small stuff, just toss it. Because as we've heard, and as many of you know, plastic is currently recycled at a rate of less than 10%. So what we put in our blue bin, we want to make sure that it counts and actually has a chance of being recycled. Because the recycling symbol is used very widely, but just because something says recyclable doesn't mean it gets recycled. Recyclable is not the same as recycled. California just passed a law addressing accuracy in labeling, so we should see some changes in packaging symbols at some point, but these things take a long time to go into effect. Refilling, as we've heard from Alejandra, is a new way to cut packaging out of the equation. You may not know that packaging can account for 4% of the price of a product. So we are lucky in our area on the Central Coast to have 3 refill stores. There's one in Santa Barbara, one Goleta, and one in Ventura. And these stores allow you to bring your own container, and some of them keep a supply of containers on hand at the store. The weight of the container is not included in the price. You just pay for what you put inside. I've been buying dish soap this way for a long time, and it is the same price or maybe cheaper than the grocery store. It's also made from really clean ingredients. They are able to source very clean products in bulk. If you don't have a refill store near you, you look for ways to cut the water out of the products that you buy, because where there's water, there's plastic. Water is the main ingredient in so many home products, from laundry detergent to shampoo, and we have water in abundance at home. So the powdered versions of laundry and dishwasher soap can be cheaper, last longer, and they're packaged in cardboard, which is recyclable. And refill shops are often a great resource for other items without water or plastic, like shampoo, conditioner, and bath and dish soap in bars. Startup companies like Blueland also offer tablet or powder-based systems where you add the water at your house. And Blueland has been scaling up and now has products available in Target and Costco, so you might even find them locally. I've been using their tablet-based system at home for hand soap for years, and I love it. And I think that their laundry boost in a powdered form is every bit as good at cleaning as bleach without the plastic or the chemicals. With the rise of fast fashion in the past couple of decades, the textile industry's footprint has become a big part of the plastic issue. According to 1% for the Planet, the fashion industry is responsible for 10% of annual global carbon emissions. That's more than the airline and shipping industries combined. We can make our clothes last longer by caring for it in certain ways. About 2/3 of clothing in general is made from fossil fuels when you think about spandex, polyester, nylon, and these clothes shed microplastics every time we wash and machine dry them. Appliances and wastewater systems were not built to filter out such tiny fibers, so they pass straight through to our waterways. A single load of laundry can release up to 1.5 million synthetic microfibers. Future washing machines might capture these fibers, but that's a long way off. In the meantime, some things you can do is wash full loads in cold water, That reduces microfiber release. Air dry your synthetics whenever possible to avoid additional microplastic shedding in the dryer. You can also extend the life of someone else's clothing and save money by shopping secondhand. There are lots of secondhand stores in the Santa Barbara area, along with websites that allow you to shop for specific items. I'm a big fan of Poshmark. You can type in a brand, size, and color and receive a nice selection to choose from, and you buy it directly from the person who is selling it for way less than you would have paid when it was new. And there's a lot of big brands that are now recognizing the benefit of controlling used sales themselves. So you can buy items directly from the websites of brands like Patagonia and Outerknown that are used. So we're not going to recycle our way out of the plastic pollution crisis. So policy change is a critical piece of this work. And for over a decade, the Community Environmental Council and our partners have pushed for policies that reduce single-use plastics at the source. We have successfully advocated for 10 regional laws that ban or limit plastic bags and small plastic accessories, as well as retail and food service styrofoam. We are continuing to advocate for comprehensive laws that tackle multiple items at once and innovate by including new items like Mylar balloons. Our Rethink the Drink program has provided schools and public spaces with water stations, allowing students and residents an alternative to single-use bottled water. One of the best actions that any of us can take about climate issues is to talk about it. There's a lot of current research about climate-related grief and anxiety, and all of them tell us that normalizing these topics in conversation with a focus on solutions can help us and others to take action. So share your experiences, tips, tricks, and solutions with others to keep that collective action going. So thank you for allowing me to share that. And it's time to turn to your questions. So I'm going to pop into the Q&A, and if we can get Alejandra and Matt back on camera, and I will start. This looks like a question that could be for Matt, but I'll let you two decide since you're sitting there sharing the camera. Who wants to answer? Butterfly is asking, can we have our body tested for amounts of plastic?
Oh, that is a really good question. I think now I don't know that we do have that option. I mean, I know that it would be nice if we had something like the DNA test, right? Like all of the 23andMe or whatever, where we could just easily have our bodies tested. So technically, yes, you could have your blood tested for plastic. But are there opportunities like a commercial lab or something that's doing that at scale or easily accessible? None that I know of, unfortunately.
Yeah, it happens for very specific studies. So we're hoping that the more information we have, the more we're going to have a push for this answer, because we all want to know. But right now, sadly, it's not a common option.
Thank you. Yeah, well, there was that study just recently about arterial plaque and how they're finding plastic in the plaque surrounding the heart of certain people who have that buildup. And I'm just wondering what you think about, if you think the medical community is going to start telling their patients about that and maybe suggest that their patients consume less plastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, we have lots of these conversations with doctors, because doctors, just a few years ago, they were not even aware of the problem with plastic. The good thing is that we have so much scientific data now that doctors are being forced into understanding the problem, because we're seeing it as a plastic problem, but we're not seeing it as a chemical issue. And it's actually a chemical issue because we're talking about endocrine disruptors. We're talking about chemicals that are causing obesity, diabetes, cancer, all of these issues. So the more data we have, the more we have doctors been forced to be educated around the issues related to plastics that are not just plastics, but also chemicals.
Could I just add to that too, that the major medical organizations, like the big national and international pediatric associations and things like that, they are now really recognizing the issue, and it's been incredible to just see, as more and more of these studies come out, they're taking stronger and stronger stances. And a lot of those are now serving as experts to advise the global plastics treaty process. So, it's really interesting because we do have, now it's unfortunately in that process, you do have those voices, but then if the politician, you also have the industry voices who are sort of countering the narrative. So it's interesting to see how that plays out in the policy dialogues. So that's why we really need to push. So we have community-based organizations and health organizations pushing for a strong treaty, industry pushing for a weak treaty. And so that's, the dynamic there. But it is an issue that's becoming very well recognized in the medical community.
Yeah, and also I wanted to add that Matt's right. Industry comes back telling us this is a health issue. If you go to a hospital, everything is plastic, and we need these plastics to survive. But fortunately, we have a lot of health organizations saying we actually don't need all those plastics because we lived without plastics in hospitals and we survived without plastics before. So having the health community be involved in the conversation and saying, hey, we can also use less plastic in our hospitals is counterbalance the conversation that the industry is trying to push to scare us, saying that we actually need plastics that we don't.
That's a great point. Thank you. Yeah, these studies really are kind of ramping up the conversation, which is great that there's opportunity for progress there. Here's kind of a quick question. Do farmed fish contain less plastic?
That is a great question, and I have no idea. I haven't seen any study or evidence that that's the case. So I think that would be it's just a really great research question. As I mentioned, like it's only been about 10 years since the research has really started to take off. And so there are so many unanswered questions, and I think that's definitely one of them, at least to my knowledge.
The good news is that all those questions that we're asking ourselves, now finally scientists are catching up to those questions. So I'm sure there's somebody working on a PhD and we'll have an answer for you pretty soon, I'm sure.
Good point. Good point. We had a plastic expo here a couple weeks ago, and we had some student researchers who are doing a lot of work on microplastics. So it's definitely becoming something that the next group of postdocs is taking seriously studying. We have a question from Mary about how do we encourage stores to put back the bulk sections? A lot of them locally here in Santa Barbara have not. Whole Foods being one of them has not put back those bulk sections that they took out during COVID.
Yeah, we had the same problem with Whole Foods, and that is you have to go to the manager and demand that option. And don't let them push you and just bullying you into this hygiene myth. We already have enough information, enough data. In fact, we can add that to the resources that we're going to share later. Just data saying, look, bulk sections are not spreading COVID. They don't have germs. They are, most of the items that we had in bulk, you can even boil, you have to boil them for minutes, right? So it's not even a problem of germs. Like when you're talking about rice and beans and chickpeas, lentils, all of that has to be boiled. So this conversation of we need to remove them because they spread COVID or germs, just be strong, stand your ground, be educated, and say, no, actually, you are providing us with the chemicals that we don't want to bring into our homes. And when you talk to them little by little, if you have one person saying something and then the second person saying something, they always pay attention. They always listen because they want to please the consumer. So make sure that you talk to that manager and let them know that you want and you deserve to have the bulk section back.
Okay, you hear that, everyone? We need to do that in our local region here. Everybody, next time you go to the store, ask for the bulk section to come back.
You could even develop a community campaign or write a letter with signatures, collect signatures and say, we want bulk back. That would be a great campaign. BBB, bulk back.
There you go. All right, done. MJ is asking if Mylar, I think because I mentioned Mylar balloons, is Mylar a plastic? Do you two want to take that one?
It is plastic, and it's a plastic that is impossible to recycle. That's why when you hear from TerraCycle saying, hey, we collect Mylar, that's a lie. That there's absolutely nothing you can do with Mylar. And I want you to keep in mind that when we recycle things, we said recycle, but plastics are not recyclable. When you're talking about aluminum, stainless steel, that's a material that you can recycle forever. But for plastics, we're just downcycling. That means that if you have a plastic water bottle, when you recycle it, that's going to become a plastic bag. That means lower quality material. It's not the same again, it's lower quality, which means you have to add more chemicals to that plastic to recycle again, which means more toxins. So it's important that we know the difference, that recycling is really important when we're talking about paper and tin and other materials, but recycling of plastics is actually not really happening.
And if I could just add to that, that what's happening now too is that industry is really distracting us because they're putting these buzzwords out there like advanced recycle, advanced recycle, chemical recycling, and they're calling that recycling. But what they're really doing is they're, in some cases, they would call what's called pyrolysis, which is essentially just burning plastic in an incinerator, creating all kinds of air pollution and toxic ash, and calling burning plastic recycling. And that is actually not as heavily regulated as a waste incinerator. So they're burning plastic, calling it recycling, creating a lot of pollution, and it's less regulated than an actual incinerator, and that's their recycling solution. So we have to be very careful about how we define recycling, because they're trying to change the narrative and call these things that are recycling when they're really not recycling.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we could do a whole webinar just on that. And also one thing that many of us have had a chance to touch on was just that the industry wants to increase production because they're losing market share because people are buying electric cars and not buying gas, and because of solar and wind coming online. So the benefits that we're seeing from renewables, the fossil fuel industry wants to figure out another way to sell that fossil fuel. So
yeah, we call it the plan B. They're trying to switch all of their profits to plastics, and they continue to tap into our need to make a change because we all want to make a change. So when they say, don't worry, your plastic is going to be chemically recycled, we get excited because we want that. It sounds so beautiful to think that plastic can become energy for someone, but we have to think that plastic at every single stage is toxins, chemicals, and poison.
absolutely. Great way to end. I'm sorry that we don't have time to do more questions. We'll try to address some of that in the resources that we send out later. Here is all of our information too, if you want to reach out to any of us. And we're grateful to all of you that joined us here today. We think together, we can work together to create a better system of consumption. Thanks to everybody who helped put on this webinar. We are so grateful to our partners at Plastic Free Future, Dr. Matt and Ms. Alejandra Warren, for sharing their time and insights with us today. And our production team has been working tirelessly behind the scenes to get this to run flawlessly. We have some upcoming events we want to make sure to share with you. We have some both virtual and at our environmental hub. So we are going to do this webinar in Spanish, a Spanish first webinar with our same guests here. We'll have a different moderator who speaks better Spanish than I do, Ana Rico from our staff, and I will be on the support team for that one. So please, if you have friends who speak Spanish or know anyone in the Spanish-speaking community, please pass this on. It's 2 weeks from tonight, same time, same Zoom channel. We're going to close out our plastic-free July events with the Santa Barbara premiere of the documentary Plastic People on Wednesday, July 31st at our hub. And then next month, we're going to have a forum in partnership with 350 Santa Barbara on California's environmental bills that are currently up before the legislature for the end of the session next month, and how you can get involved in helping with that. And those events are all on our website, cecsb.org/events. In order to reverse the climate crisis, we need everyone working together. If you're interested in taking climate action, please join us. You can visit our Take Climate Action page to subscribe to our e-newsletter, learn about upcoming events, and engage with some of our most popular programs, like CEC Climate Stewards. Thank you to all the stewards who are on tonight. It's our 9-week certification course. Or CEC's Electrify Your Life, which is our free service that helps you find the best rebates and incentives for electric vehicles and home energy upgrades. You can use the QR code on this slide or the URL in the chat to learn more. This brings our webinar to a close. We'll leave this slide up for you to take note of the info, and we hope you have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you so much, and good night.